I should have known something was wrong the moment Patricia Cunningham showed up at my door wearing a pantsuit the color of aggressive beige and carrying a clipboard like it was the Holy Grail. It was a Tuesday. A beautiful, innocent Tuesday in May, when the only thing I'd planned to worry about was whether my lawn was being watered with the proper pH-balanced water at precisely the HOA-approved schedule of 6:47 a.m. "Logan," she said, not asked, not suggested, but declared with the confidence of someone who'd been elected Homeowners Association President 3 times running because literally no one else wanted the job. "We need to discuss your fence proposal." I'd submitted my fence proposal 6 weeks earlier. 6 weeks. It was a simple cedar fence. Nothing crazy. Just something to keep my golden retriever, Captain Fluffernutter, from greeting every single person who walked down our street like they were long-lost relatives returning from war. The dog had no concept of personal space, and Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down had made it abundantly clear that being tackled by 60 pounds of enthusiastic canine while carrying groceries was not her idea of neighborly charm. In fact, Mrs. Henderson had filed 3 separate complaints with the HOA about Captain Fluffernutter. 3. The first one was after he'd jumped on her while she was wearing white pants. The second was when he'd stolen a rotisserie chicken right out of her shopping bag. The third, and this one was my personal favorite, was when he'd somehow managed to get into her backyard and dig up her prized tulip bulbs, presenting them to her like they were treasures he'd excavated specifically for her enjoyment. So yes, I needed a fence, desperately. "The board has reviewed your application," Patricia continued, flipping through papers on her clipboard with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor presenting evidence in a murder trial. "And we're denying it." "I'm sorry, what?" Section 4.7, subsection C of the HOA guidelines clearly states that no fence may exceed 4 feet in height. Your proposal specified 6 feet. I stood there, in my doorway, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that said, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right," trying to process this information. "Patricia, a 4-foot fence is basically a suggestion to a dog. That's a hurdle. That's an invitation to test his vertical leap capabilities. 4 feet is the maximum allowed height. The board feels that anything taller would disrupt the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood." Aesthetic uniformity. We lived in a subdivision called Whispering Meadows, where every house was one of 3 models painted one of 4 colors, and she was worried about aesthetic uniformity. My next-door neighbor, Derek, had a garden gnome collection that looked like the aftermath of a ceramic massacre. But sure, my 6-foot cedar fence was going to be the thing that destroyed property values. Let me tell you about Derek's gnomes. There were 47 of them. I'd counted. 47 ceramic abominations arranged in what Derek called thematic vignettes. There was a gnome fishing scene, a gnome having a barbecue, a gnome wedding party that was frankly disturbing in its attention to detail. One of the gnomes was riding a motorcycle. A motorcycle! These things were everywhere, multiplying like tribbles, and yet somehow my tasteful cedar fence was the aesthetic emergency. "What if I promise the fence will be really pretty?" I tried. Patricia's smile could have frozen lava. 4 feet, Logan. Those are the rules." She turned and walked back down my driveway, her sensible low heels clicking against the concrete with the rhythm of a ticking time bomb. I watched her go, then looked down at Captain Fluffernutter, who was sitting beside me, tongue out, completely oblivious to the fact that he was the source of this crisis. "This is your fault, buddy," I told him. He wagged his tail. No remorse whatsoever. Now, a reasonable person would have probably just accepted the ruling, built the 4-foot fence, and dealt with the consequences. But here's the thing about me that Patricia and her board of suburban tyrants didn't fully appreciate. I'm an environmental engineer. I spend my days figuring out creative solutions to problems. And more importantly, I'm petty. Not just regular petty. We're talking Olympic level, gold medal, stand on the podium while your national anthem plays petty. My pettiness has a documented history. In college, when my roommate kept eating my clearly labeled leftover pizza, I started labeling it with increasingly aggressive names. Started with Logan's Pizza, do not touch. Escalated to, this pizza is a test of your character. Eventually got to, eating this pizza means you owe me your firstborn child, legally binding. He ate it anyway. I made him sign a contract. He still owes me that kid. So I did what any rational, mature adult would do. I started researching loopholes. The HOA bylaws were 73 pages of the most mind-numbing legal jargon ever committed to paper. I'm convinced they were written by someone who'd been personally victimized by joy and had made it their life's mission to stamp it out wherever it bloomed. There were rules about mailbox colors, black, white, or bronze only. Rules about Christmas decorations, must be removed by January 5th, no exceptions. Rules about garage doors, must remain closed except when actively entering or exiting. There was even a rule about bird feeders, which could only be placed in backyards and must not attract pest birds like starlings or grackles, as if birds checked the HOA bylaws before deciding where to eat. I spent 3 nights reading through this document. 3 nights of my life I'll never get back, wading through phrases like heretofore mentioned stipulations and notwithstanding the aforementioned provisions. My wife, Sarah, thought I'd lost my mind. "Logan, it's just a fence," she said, watching me highlight another section of the bylaws at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. "It's not about the fence anymore," I told her, probably looking slightly unhinged. "It's about principle. It's about revenge. Principle-based revenge." She just shook her head and went to bed, leaving me alone with my highlighters and my increasingly elaborate plans for HOA-sanctioned anarchy. But buried in Section 8.2, subsection G, paragraph 4, I found it. The golden ticket. The loophole to end all loopholes. Landscaping and natural vegetation are not subject to height restrictions, provided they are maintained in a manner consistent with neighborhood standards. Natural vegetation, not subject to height restrictions. I literally laughed out loud. Captain Fluffernutter looked at me with concern, probably wondering if I'd finally snapped. I hadn't snapped. I'd ascended to a higher plane of existence, a plane where the rules were my playground, and Patricia Cunningham was about to learn a very important lesson about the letter versus the spirit of the law. The next morning, I drove to Green Thumb Gardens, a nursery about 20 minutes outside of Whispering Meadows. The owner, a guy named Marcus, who wore tie-dye t-shirts and had opinions about soil composition that bordered on religious zealotry, greeted me like an old friend. Marcus was the kind of guy who could talk about composting methods for 6 hours without taking a breath. He had a PhD in botany, but preferred to spend his days helping suburban homeowners choose between petunias and impatiens. His nursery was his kingdom, and he ruled it with the benevolent wisdom of someone who understood that plants were superior to people in almost every measurable way. "Logan, what brings you in? Finally ready to start that herb garden you mentioned." "Marcus, my friend, I need to talk to you about bamboo." His eyes lit up, literally lit up like I'd just asked him to explain his passion. "Bamboo, excellent choice. Fast-growing, sustainable, creates a natural privacy screen. How fast are we talking? Depends on the species. Golden bamboo? That can grow up to 3 feet per day during peak season. 3 feet per day. I felt a smile spread across my face that probably made me look slightly unhinged. Tell me everything. Marcus walked me through the nursery, explaining the differences between running bamboo and clumping bamboo, the importance of root barriers, and the various species available. Running bamboo, he explained, spreads through underground rhizomes and can take over entire properties if not properly contained. Clumping bamboo stays in one place, but doesn't grow as tall or as dense. For my purposes, I needed running bamboo with a serious root barrier. We settled on Philostachys aurea, or golden bamboo, which was not only incredibly fast-growing, but also created dense, virtually impenetrable walls of foliage. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of mature golden bamboo installations. They were magnificent, solid walls of green stalks that swayed gently in the breeze, creating natural fences that no HOA regulation could touch. You'll want to install a proper root barrier, Marcus warned. This stuff spreads like wildfire if you're not careful. 60 mil HDPE barrier, buried at least 30 inches deep. I've seen bamboo break through concrete foundations when people don't take this seriously. Money is no object, I said, which wasn't entirely true, but my savings account was about to become a casualty in the war against HOA tyranny. How much are we talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed him the length of the property line I wanted to cover. 87 feet of frontage along the street, running from the edge of my driveway to the property line I shared with Derek. His eyebrows shot up. That's a lot of bamboo, man. Can you do it? He grinned. Brother, I can absolutely do it. But are you sure about this? This is going to be seriously tall, seriously fast, and seriously expensive. We're talking about $5,000 minimum for materials and installation. $5,000. That was a vacation to Hawaii. That was a used car. That was 6 months of groceries. But it was also the exact amount I was willing to pay to see the look on Patricia's face when she realized she'd been outmaneuvered. Marcus, I've never been more sure of anything in my entire life. We shook hands. The deal was struck. I was about to become the proud owner of what would eventually become a living, breathing, photosynthesizing middle finger to the Whispering Meadows HOA. The installation took 3 days. Marcus and his crew showed up at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning with a trench digger, 47 3-gallon containers of golden bamboo, several rolls of root barrier that looked like they could contain a nuclear reactor, and enough soil amendments to start a small farm. The trench digger was the size of a small car and made a sound like a mechanical dinosaur eating rocks. Derek next door watched the whole operation with the kind of confused fascination usually reserved for watching someone assemble IKEA furniture. He came over around noon on the first day, holding a beer and looking at the massive trench that now ran along my property line. "What are you doing?" he called over from his yard, standing among his army of garden gnomes. "Planting bamboo," I called back cheerfully. "That's going to get huge." "I certainly hope so." "Is this about the fence thing?" "This is absolutely about the fence thing." He laughed so hard he snorted beer out of his nose. "You're insane. I love it. When Patricia sees this, she's going to have an aneurysm." "That's the plan." Sarah was less enthusiastic. She stood on our porch, watching Marcus's crew lower the root barriers into the trenches, her arms crossed in that way wives cross their arms when they're trying to decide if they should be supportive or start researching divorce lawyers. Logan, are you sure about this? Completely sure. $5,000 sure? Patricia denied my fence request, sure. She sighed. You know you're going to have to maintain this, right? Bamboo isn't like regular plants. It needs attention. It needs trimming. It needs to grow tall enough to block out the sun and cast Patricia's house into eternal darkness? I was going to say water and fertilizer, but okay. Patricia drove by twice during the installation. The first time she slowed down but kept going, probably trying to process what she was seeing. The second time, she actually stopped and got out of her car. It was Sunday afternoon, and Marcus was supervising the placement of the final plants. I was standing in my yard, supervising the supervision, when she approached. Her face had gone through several emotional stages. Confusion gave way to understanding, which gave way to horror, which gave way to rage so pure I could practically see it radiating off her like heat waves. Logan, what is this? Landscaping, I said with the enthusiasm of a game show host revealing the grand prize. Section 8.2, subsection G, paragraph 4. Natural vegetation is permitted without height restrictions. I checked, multiple times. Had my lawyer check it too, actually, just to be thorough. That last part was a lie. I hadn't consulted a lawyer, but Patricia didn't need to know that. I watched the color drain from her face as she realized what I'd done. She pulled out her phone and started frantically scrolling through what I could only assume was a digital copy of the HOA bylaws. Her finger moved faster and faster across the screen, her breathing getting shallower, her lips moving silently as she read. This is permitted, I offered helpfully. Within regulations? A perfectly acceptable use of my property that complies with all stated rules and demonstrates a thorough understanding of the bylaws you helped write? Her jaw clenched so hard, I heard a tooth crack. This isn't what that section is intended for. But it is what it says. And as you reminded me just last week, Patricia, those are the rules. Rules are rules, right? Isn't that what you told me when you denied my completely reasonable fence request? Isn't that the same clipboard speech you've given to half the neighborhood about everything from mailbox fonts to porch light wattage? Marcus walked over, wiping soil from his hands, trying very hard not to laugh. Derek had migrated to the property line and was openly grinning, not even trying to hide his amusement. Patricia stood there, vibrating with barely contained rage, her pantsuit now a shade of furious beige, if such a thing existed. Her clipboard hung limply at her side, suddenly powerless. The almighty clipboard had met its match in the form of golden bamboo and a well-researched loophole. Finally, she found her voice. The board will hear about this? I'm counting on it, I replied. Feel free to use my name in the meeting minutes. She turned and marched back to her car without another word. We watched her drive away, probably to make angry phone calls and update her PowerPoint presentation with new slides titled, How Logan Parker Destroyed Everything I Stand For. Marcus walked over, wiping soil from his hands. Dude, I think you just made an enemy for life. Oh, Marcus, I said, admiring the neat row of bamboo that would soon become my green wall of victory. We were enemies the moment she denied my fence proposal. She just didn't know it yet. Derek raised his beer in salute. To the bamboo. May it grow tall and drive Patricia absolutely insane. To the bamboo, I echoed. The bamboo started growing immediately. And I mean immediately. Within a week, the shoots had visibly grown. I took daily pictures, documenting the progress like a proud parent with a baby book. Day 1, 6 inches. Day 3, 14 inches. Day 7, 26 inches. By day 10, some of the faster-growing stalks had reached 3 feet. Within 2 weeks, they'd reached 6 feet, the exact height my original fence proposal had specified. I stood in my yard, looking at the 6-foot bamboo, and felt a wave of satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Within a month, they were pushing 12 feet. Captain Fluffernutter was thoroughly contained. He'd tested the bamboo exactly once, running full speed at it like he used to run at the invisible barrier of our unfenced yard. He bounced off and sat down, looking confused, as if the laws of physics had personally betrayed him. After that, he accepted his fate with the dignity of a dog who'd been bested by fancy grass. I watered them diligently, following Marcus's detailed care instructions. Bamboo needs about 1 inch of water per week, more during the peak growing season. I fed them the premium fertilizer Marcus had recommended, a nitrogen-rich blend specifically formulated for bamboo. I watched with the pride of a parent as they reached toward the sky like they had personal vendettas against clouds. Sarah started to come around to the bamboo. She admitted, grudgingly, that the privacy was nice, that the sound of wind through the bamboo was actually quite peaceful, that she enjoyed sitting in the backyard knowing that Patricia couldn't see us from the street. "I still think you're petty," she said one evening as we sat in our newly private yard. "I never claimed otherwise. But I guess if you're going to be petty, you might as well be spectacularly petty." That's the spirit. Captain Fluffernutter loved the bamboo. He couldn't jump over it, couldn't squeeze through it, and seemed to accept that his days of street greeting were over. He adapted by instead lying in the shade the bamboo provided, living his best life while I lived mine. Sometimes I'd find him just sitting there, staring at the bamboo like he was contemplating the nature of barriers both physical and philosophical. The HOA, predictably, lost their collective minds. The first letter arrived 6 weeks after installation. It was delivered by certified mail, which meant I had to sign for it, which meant Patricia had spent extra money just to ensure I received her rage in physical form. The letter was 2 pages of increasingly desperate legal language that basically boiled down to "please stop," dressed up in official-sounding words. The letter began, "Dear Mr. Parker, it has come to the attention of the Whispering Meadows Homeowners Association Board of Directors that you have installed landscaping that, while technically compliant with current bylaws, represents a departure from the aesthetic standards our community has maintained." I responded with a single sentence typed in size 72 font. Per section 8.2, subsection G, paragraph 4, this landscaping is within compliance. I may have also included a smiley face emoji. Professional pettiness requires attention to detail. The second letter arrived 2 weeks later, this time with threats of fines for excessive vegetation and maintenance concerns, and potential impact on neighboring property values. I responded by citing 3 different sections of the bylaws that specifically protected natural vegetation, along with screenshots of the exact text I'd found. I also included a printout of the receipt from Green Thumb Gardens showing the root barrier installation, along with Marcus's professional certification as a landscaper. I may have also included a different smiley face emoji. Variety is important. The third letter wasn't a letter at all. It was a summons to appear before the board at an emergency meeting. Emergency. They'd called an emergency meeting about my bamboo. I framed that summons and hung it on my refrigerator. By month 3, the bamboo was 18 feet tall. It was glorious. It was magnificent. It was a towering wall of green that blocked the view of my yard from the street so completely that I could have been running a speakeasy back there, and no one would have known. Birds nested in it, cardinals, sparrows, and even a pair of mourning doves that set up shop about 15 feet up. The sound of wind rustling through the leaves was actually kind of peaceful. I started taking my morning coffee outside just to admire my handiwork. The neighborhood was divided. Half the people thought I was a genius. Derek threw a thumbs up every time he saw me. Mrs. Henderson, whose groceries were no longer in danger, actually baked me cookies. Chocolate chip, still warm from the oven, delivered with a note that said, "Thank you for containing the beast." A couple of other residents came by to ask about the installation process, wondering if they too could engage in some creative interpretation of HOA bylaws. Tom Martinez from 3 houses down spent 20 minutes asking me detailed questions about root barriers and growth rates. He had a neighbor who kept complaining about his kid's basketball hoop, and he was wondering if strategic landscaping might solve his problem. The key, I told him, is finding the exact wording in the bylaws that works in your favor. "You're like the Atticus Finch of HOA warfare," he said admiringly. "I prefer to think of myself as the Robin Hood of suburban pettiness." The other half thought I was destroying the neighborhood. Patricia organized that half into what I can only describe as an anti-bamboo coalition. They started a petition, an actual physical petition demanding the HOA board take action against my aggressive vegetation and willful disregard for community standards. The petition made its rounds through the neighborhood. 43 people signed it. 43! Out of a community of 217 households. I wasn't great at math, but even I could calculate that was less than 20%. Sarah found the whole thing hilarious. "You've literally divided the neighborhood into pro-bamboo and anti-bamboo factions. You've created a political crisis over grass." "Technically, bamboo is in the grass family," I pointed out. "That's your takeaway from this?" "I contain multitudes." The board called an emergency meeting. I was cordially invited to attend. The invitation used the word cordially, but the subtext screamed, "You're going to pay for this, Logan Parker, and we're going to make sure everyone watches." The meeting was held in the community center, a building that usually hosted yoga classes and book clubs, but tonight was packed with at least 50 residents. All there to witness what would surely be a legendary showdown. People brought popcorn. Actual popcorn, Tom Martinez gave me a thumbs up as I walked in. A woman I'd never met before whispered, "Team Bamboo," as I passed her seat. I arrived wearing a suit. Not because I thought it would help my case, but because I wanted Patricia to know I was taking this as seriously as she was. Sarah came with me, wearing her best, "I'm supporting my husband even though he's absolutely ridiculous" dress. Patricia sat at the front of the room with 4 other board members, all of them looking like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. To her right was Bill Thompson, the treasurer, who mostly seemed confused about why he was there and kept checking his watch. To her left was Sandra Martinez, the secretary, who kept shooting me apologetic looks. The other 2 members I didn't know well, but they had the exhausted expressions of people who'd been listening to Patricia rant about my bamboo for months. Patricia called the meeting to order with a gavel. She had an actual gavel. Where does someone even get a gavel? Is there a store that specializes in items for people who take their minimal authority way too seriously? Did she order it online? Was there a website called Gavels Are Us? Did it come with a plaque that said, "Best HOA president who takes things way too seriously"? "We're here "Tonight, to address the issue of Logan Parker's property," she began, and I'm not exaggerating when I say she pronounced my name like it was a curse word. Like Logan Parker was synonymous with chaos incarnate, or destroyer of suburban dreams. Specifically, the excessive bamboo that has been planted along his front property line. "Objection," I said, raising my hand. "The bamboo is not excessive. It's flourishing. There's a difference." Someone in the audience snorted. I was pretty sure it was Derek. Patricia's glare could have melted steel. "Mr. Parker, you will have an opportunity to speak. Right now, I am presenting the board's concerns." She clicked a button, and a PowerPoint presentation appeared on the screen behind her. A PowerPoint. She'd made a PowerPoint about my bamboo. The title slide read, "The Impact of Non-Compliant Landscaping on Community Standards." Below that, in smaller text, a comprehensive analysis. Comprehensive. Analysis. Of bamboo. Slide 1 was a photo of my yard from the street. The bamboo wall was indeed impressive, towering above my roofline, a solid mass of green that would have made the Great Wall of China nod in approval. Patricia had clearly taken the photo from the most dramatic angle possible, making the bamboo look like it was preparing to march down the street and consume the entire neighborhood. "As you can see," Patricia continued, "this vegetation has grown to approximately 20 feet in height. It blocks the view of Mr. Parker's home entirely and has created what I can only describe as a visual blight on our community." Visual blight? I couldn't help myself. "It's bamboo, Patricia, not a meth lab, not a junkyard, not a neon sign that says Patricia's worst nightmare. It's a plant. A nice plant. A plant that provides oxygen and habitat for wildlife and looks objectively better than at least 60% of the landscaping in this neighborhood." More snorts from the audience. I definitely heard Derek that time. Patricia's face turned a shade of red that probably had its own Pantone number. Pantone 485C. Bureaucratic rage. The HOA bylaws state that landscaping must be maintained in a manner consistent with neighborhood standards. A 20-foot bamboo wall is not consistent with anything in Whispering Meadows. "Show me the neighborhood standard," I countered, standing up now because this felt like a standing up kind of moment. "What's the exact height that qualifies as consistent? Is it the 6 feet of Derek's weeping willow? The 12 feet of the Johnsons' Italian cypress trees? The 15 feet of the oak tree in the common area? The 18-foot magnolia in the Hendersons' backyard? Where exactly in the bylaws does it specify the acceptable height for trees and shrubs?" Bill Thompson actually nodded at this. Sandra was trying not to smile, her pen hovering over her notebook, as she presumably tried to figure out how to record this in the official minutes. Patricia shuffled through her slides. Slide 2 showed my bamboo from a different angle. Slide 3 was a comparison shot of my house before bamboo and after bamboo. The before picture looked normal. The after picture looked like I lived in a jungle, which, to be fair, was becoming increasingly accurate. "This is different. How? How is it different? Because you don't like it? Because it wasn't what you envisioned when you wrote bylaws so restrictive that they probably violate several Geneva Conventions? Because it reminds you that rules have loopholes and that sometimes people find those loopholes and exploit them in creative ways that are technically completely legal?" The room erupted. Half the people were laughing, the other half were shouting, and Patricia was banging her gavel so hard I was genuinely concerned it was going to break into splinters. "Order! I will have order!" When everyone finally settled down, Sandra cleared her throat. Patricia, if I may, I actually looked into this, and Logan's right. The bylaws don't specify height restrictions for natural vegetation. He's technically in compliance. I consulted with the HOA's lawyer, and she confirmed that the current bylaws don't give us grounds to force removal or modification of the bamboo. Patricia turned to Sandra with a look of such complete betrayal that I almost felt bad for her. Almost. It was the look of someone who'd just realized that their most trusted lieutenant had defected to the enemy. "We can amend the bylaws," Patricia said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. She was grasping at straws now, and everyone in the room could see it. "We can," Bill chimed in, suddenly interested in the proceedings. "But amendments require a vote at a general meeting with 60% approval. And they're not retroactive. Even if we amend it now, Logan's bamboo would be grandfathered in. That's standard HOA law. You can't change the rules and then penalize people for things they did before the rule change." I leaned back in my chair, trying very hard not to look smug. I was failing miserably. My face was probably doing the thing Sarah calls my insufferable victory face. Patricia shuffled her papers. She clicked through a few more PowerPoint slides that were essentially just different angles of my bamboo, as if seeing it from the southwest instead of the southeast would somehow make her case stronger. There was even a slide showing the bamboo's shadow patterns at different times of day, complete with measurements and a graph. She'd really committed to this presentation. Finally, she let out a long breath that seemed to deflate her entire body. "Fine. The board will review potential amendments to the landscaping section of the bylaws. But Mr. Parker, if that bamboo spreads to anyone else's property, if it causes any damage, if it becomes a genuine nuisance, proper root barriers have been installed by a certified professional. Marcus at Green Thumb. Gardens is a professional with 20 years of experience and a PhD in botany. That bamboo isn't going anywhere except up. I have documentation, warranties, and Marcus's personal guarantee. The root barriers are 60 mil HDPE, buried 30 inches deep with a 3-foot buffer. That bamboo has a better containment system than most nuclear reactors." One of the other board members, a guy named Jeff, who I'd never heard speak before, actually laughed at that. Patricia shot him a look that could have killed a lesser man. The meeting adjourned shortly after, though not before Patricia made everyone sit through 6 more slides detailing theoretical concerns about the bamboo. Pest concerns, unfounded. Fire hazard concerns. Bamboo is actually less flammable than many common shrubs. Property value concerns. No data to support this. By slide 12, people were openly checking their phones. As people filed out, several came up to shake my hand or pat me on the back. Derek practically bear-hugged me, lifting me off the ground. "That was the greatest thing I've ever seen," he whispered, setting me back down. "Patricia's face when Sandra sided with you? When Bill talked about retroactive rules? I'm going to remember that on my deathbed. I'm going to be 97 years old, taking my last breath, and I'm going to think about Patricia's PowerPoint about your bamboo, and I'm going to die happy." Mrs. Henderson gave me another container of cookies. "You've inspired me," she said quietly. "I'm planting a hedge, a tall one. The Johnson's dog keeps getting into my yard." "Go with English laurel," I advised. "Fast-growing, dense, stays green year-round." Even some of the anti-bamboo coalition members admitted, quietly and away from Patricia's earshot, that while they didn't love the bamboo, they respected the hustle. One woman, I think her name was Carol, whispered, "I signed the petition, but honestly, that was impressive. Patricia had it coming." Patricia, for her part, left without speaking to anyone. She gathered her laptop, her gavel, her stack of handouts about responsible landscaping, and her wounded pride then climbed into her sensible sedan and drove away. Probably to plot her next move, or to write angry letters to the concept of loopholes itself. Tom Martinez walked out with me. You know what the beautiful thing is? You forced them to actually look at their own bylaws. Half these rules exist because nobody ever questions them. You questioned them. You weaponized them. I prefer to think of it as creative interpretation. Potato, potato. The bamboo continued to grow. By the end of summer, it had maxed out at about 22 feet, creating a solid wall that provided complete privacy, blocked out the noise from the street, and frankly looked pretty spectacular when the evening sun hit it just right. The stalks had thickened, the leaves had filled in, and the whole thing had this gorgeous golden-green color that changed throughout the day. I hung string lights through some of the stalks, added a couple of comfortable chairs in the shaded area beneath, and created what I called my bamboo sanctuary. Sarah added some potted plants, ferns and hostas that thrived in the shade. We got a small table, some outdoor cushions, and suddenly we had this secret garden vibe happening in our front yard. Captain Fluffernutter spent every evening out there with me, finally at peace in a yard he couldn't escape from. I spent those evenings reading, sipping beer, and occasionally waving at Derek through the gaps between the stalks. Sometimes Sarah would join me, and we'd sit there in comfortable silence, listening to the bamboo rustle in the wind. You know, she said one night, this is actually really nice. The bamboo? All of it? The privacy, the quiet, the fact that Patricia can't see us from the street, and it probably drives her crazy. That last part might be my favorite feature. Of course it is. The HOA did eventually amend the bylaws. The new Section 8.2, subsection G, paragraph 4 now reads, landscaping and natural vegetation must not exceed 15 feet in height unless approved by the board. They tried to make it retroactive. 3 different lawyers told them that would never hold up in court. They gave up. The amendment passed at the next general meeting with exactly 61% approval, barely over the required 60% threshold. I voted against it, obviously. So did Derek, Mrs. Henderson, Tom Martinez, and a surprising number of other residents. The vote became a referendum on Patricia's leadership, as much as it was about bamboo height restrictions. Patricia served out the rest of her term as president, but declined to run for re-election. Sandra took over, and her first act was to approve my original fence proposal, the 6-foot cedar fence I'd wanted in the first place. She called me personally to let me know. Just wanted to inform you that if you still want to build that fence, the board has approved your original proposal, she said. I thanked her, but politely declined. I'd grown quite attached to my bamboo wall. It had personality, it had history, it had a 20-foot vertical middle finger quality that a regular fence just couldn't match. About a year after the whole thing started, I was in my backyard sanctuary when I heard someone knock on my gate. I opened it to find Patricia standing there, looking significantly less aggressive than the last time we'd spoken. She wasn't wearing a pantsuit. No clipboard. She looked almost human. "Logan," she said, "can we talk?" I invited her in. She stood in my backyard, looking up at the bamboo wall towering above us, and let out a long sigh that seemed to carry the weight of an entire year of bamboo-related stress. "I was wrong," she said finally, and those 3 words seemed to cause her physical pain. I was so focused on the rules, on maintaining control, on making sure everyone followed the exact letter of the bylaws that I forgot why we have an HOA in the first place. It's supposed to make the neighborhood better, not make people's lives harder. I didn't know what to say to that. An apology from Patricia Cunningham was something I'd never imagined possible. It was like seeing a unicorn, or finding out that birds aren't real conspiracy theorists were actually onto something. Your bamboo is actually... She struggled with each word like they physically hurt to say, nice. It's unique. It's well-maintained. And honestly, it's probably increased your property value. Several people have asked about doing similar landscaping. 2 families have already installed bamboo in their backyards. Tom Martinez planted a hedge of Leyland cypress that's already 8 feet tall. Patricia Cunningham, are you telling me you approve of my petty revenge bamboo wall? She almost smiled. Almost. The corners of her mouth twitched upward in what might have been the beginning of a smile before she caught herself. I'm saying that maybe rigid adherence to rules isn't always the answer, and maybe I should have approved your fence in the first place. A 6-foot fence was a reasonable request. I denied it because I could, not because I should. We stood there in silence for a moment, the wind rustling through the bamboo leaves above us, creating that peaceful sound that I'd grown to love. For what it's worth, I said, you did teach me something valuable. You taught me to read the fine print. You taught me that rules are only as strong as their wording. And you taught me that sometimes the best way to fight an unreasonable rule is to follow the rules so precisely that you expose their flaws. She actually laughed at that. It was a short laugh, almost a bark, but it was genuine. Come to the next board meeting. We're discussing a proposal to add more creative freedom to the landscaping guidelines. Sandra thinks we need input from residents who actually have to live with these rules. I think you might have useful perspective. Are you asking me to join the HOA board? God, no. You'd burn the whole thing down within a month. I'm asking you to help us write better rules. Rules that make sense. Rules that give people reasonable freedom while still maintaining some basic standards. After she left, I sat back down in my chair, Captain Fluffernutter at my feet, and looked up at my 22-foot bamboo wall. It swayed gently in the breeze. A living testament to the power of spite, creativity, and the careful reading of HOA bylaws. Derek called over from his yard. Was that Patricia? Did she finally crack? She apologized, I called back. No way. Way. And she asked me to help revise the landscaping rules. Your bamboo broke her. You broke Patricia Cunningham with fancy grass. The bamboo educated her. There's a difference. Whatever you say, man, but we all know the truth. You won the HOA war with bamboo. You're a legend. The thing is, I never really wanted a 20-foot bamboo wall. I wanted a 6-foot fence to keep my dog in the yard. But sometimes in life, you don't get what you want. You get something better. You get a story. You get a beautiful, ridiculous, over-the-top monument to suburban pettiness that grows 3 feet per day during peak season. You get to be the guy who found the loophole, exploited it perfectly, and turned his front yard into a legitimate privacy fortress, using nothing but fast-growing grass and an environmental engineer's understanding of creative problem-solving. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Would I recommend it to others? Only if they're prepared to water it religiously, maintain the root barriers, and handle a lot of angry neighbors with clipboards and PowerPoint presentations about vegetation-related community concerns. The bamboo wall of Whispering Meadows became something of a legend in our area. Other HOAs heard about it and quickly amended their bylaws to prevent copycat installations, usually with oddly specific language like including but not limited to bamboo species or fast-growing grass varieties. Real estate agents started mentioning it on tours, either as a selling point, amazing privacy features, or a warning, the neighbors are creative, depending on the buyers. A local newspaper even did a small feature on it titled, When HOA rules meet creative compliance, the bamboo wall of whispering meadows. The article included a photo of me standing in front of my bamboo wall, holding Captain Fluffernutter, with a quote that made me sound way more philosophical than I actually am. Sometimes the best way to change an unfair rule is to follow it so precisely that its flaws become impossible to ignore. I framed that article and hung it in my living room, right next to the original denial letter for my fence proposal. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I go outside and sit under the bamboo, listening to the leaves whisper their secrets to the wind. I think about Patricia showing up at my door with her clipboard, telling me that 4 feet was the maximum height allowed for fences. 4 feet. The maximum height allowed. I look up at my 22-foot bamboo wall and smile, because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's finding the loophole, planting 3 feet per day growing bamboo with a PhD botanist's blessing, and watching it grow into something so spectacular that even your enemies have to admit it's kind of impressive. It's turning a restriction into an opportunity, a denial into a triumph, and a Tuesday afternoon disagreement into a legendary tale of suburban warfare that gets told at dinner parties and neighborhood barbecues. Captain Fluffernutter snores softly beside me, dreaming whatever dogs dream about. Maybe he's dreaming about the days when he could escape the yard and tackle unsuspecting neighbors. Maybe he's dreaming about Mrs. Henderson's rotisserie chicken. Maybe he's dreaming about a world without fences or bamboo walls or HOA restrictions. Or maybe, just maybe, he's dreaming about the look on Patricia's face when she realized she'd been outmaneuvered by a combination of environmental engineering expertise, comprehensive bylaw research, and extremely fast-growing ornamental grass that technically qualified as landscaping and natural vegetation. Either way, I think we're both pretty happy with how things turned out. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, if your HOA denies your reasonable request and quotes arbitrary rules at you while clutching their clipboard like it contains the secrets of the universe, I have one piece of advice. Read the bylaws. All 73 pages of them. Every single boring, mind-numbing page. Every section, subsection, paragraph, and clause. Because somewhere in those pages of bureaucratic nonsense, there's probably a loophole. And that loophole might just be the key to your own personal bamboo wall of victory, or your hedge of English laurel, or your grove of Italian cypress, or whatever creative interpretation of natural vegetation speaks to your particular brand of petty revenge. Just make sure you install proper root barriers. Marcus wasn't kidding about that part.